Seldon cleared his throat and leaned forward. Chief Librarian, Laz Zenow has no doubt told you of my work here and of my idea for an Encyclopedia Galactica. In fact, it was he who located the eventual home of the Encyclopedia Project, a remote outer world called Terminus. There was one thing, however, that Lass could not provide. In order to keep the project on schedule, I must have office space and unlimited access granted to a number of my colleagues as well. It is an enormous undertaking, just gathering the information to be copied and transferred to Terminus before we can begin the actual work of compiling the encyclopedia. Lass was not popular with the library board, as you are undoubtedly aware. You, however, are. And so I ask you, Chief Librarian, will you see to it that my colleagues are granted insider's privileges so that we may continue our most vital work? Here Harry stopped, almost out of breath. He waited, confident in Ancarnio's response. Professor Seldon, Ancarnio began, my esteemed predecessor provided me in exhaustive detail an explication of your work here at the library. He was quite enthusiastic about your research and committed to the idea of your colleagues joining you here. As was I, Professor Seldon. At Ancarnio's pause, Seldon looked up sharply. At first, I was prepared to call a special meeting of the board to propose that a larger suite of offices be prepared for you and your encyclopedists. But, Professor Seldon, all that has now changed. Changed? But why? Professor Seldon, you have just finished serving as principal defendant in a most sensational assault and battery case. But I was acquitted. The case never even made it to trial. None the less, Professor, your latest foray into the public eye has given you an undeniable, how shall I say it, tinge of ill repute. Seldon, like it or not, you have become an object of derision, a subject of ridicule, a laughing-stock. Pardon me, Chief Librarian, but for years now I have been to some circles a laughing-stock. Yes, but only to some circles. But this latest incident has opened you up to ridicule not only here on Trantor, but throughout the worlds. And, Professor, by providing you an office, we, the Galactic Library, also become a laughing-stock throughout the worlds. And no matter how strongly I may personally believe in your theory and your encyclopedia, as Chief Librarian of the Galactic Library on Trantor, I must think of the library first. And so, Professor Seldon, your request to bring your colleagues is denied. Hari Seldon gasped and jerked back in his chair as if struck. Further, Ancarnio continued, I must advise you of a 2-week temporary suspension of all library privileges, effective immediately. The board has called that special meeting, Professor Seldon. In 2 weeks' time, we will notify you whether or not we've decided that our association with you must be terminated. Here Ancarnio stopped speaking and, placing his palms on the glossy, spotless surface of his desk, stood up. That is all, Professor Seldon, for now. Ancarnio guided Seldon to the door. As the portal slid open, Ancarnio said, 2 weeks, Professor Seldon. Till then. Harry stepped through to his waiting skitter, and the doors slid shut. What am I going to do now? Wondered Seldon disconsolately. Is this the end of all my work? Wanda, dear, what is it that has you so engrossed? Asked Hari Seldon as he entered his granddaughter's office at Streeling University. Wanda had gradually taken over Hugo Amaral's role in recent years, further refining and adjusting the prime radiant. Why, I'm working on an equation in section 33A 2D17. See, I've recalibrated this section. She gestured to a glowing violet patch suspended in midair in front of her face, taking into consideration the standard quotient and... There, just what I thought, I think. She stepped back and rubbed her eyes. What is it, Wanda? Harry moved in closer to study the equation. Why, this looks like the terminus equation, and yet... Wanda, this is an inverse of the terminus equation, isn't it? How did you do it? Harry admired the equation's lines, its logic, its elegance. At first, I concentrated on it from over here only. In order to get terminus to work on terminus. Stands to reason, doesn't it? But then I realized that I couldn't just introduce this equation into the prime radiant system and expect it to blend right in smoothly. A placement means a displacement somewhere else. A weight needs a counterweight. I think the concept to which you are referring is what the ancients called yin and yang. Yes, more or less. Yin and yang. So, you see, I realized that to perfect the yin of terminus, I had to locate its yang, which I did over there. She moved back to the violet patch tucked away at the outer edge of the prime radiant sphere. And once I adjusted the figures here, the terminus equation fell into place as well. Harmony. Wanda looked pleased with herself, as if she'd solved all the problems of the Empire. Fascinating, Wanda. And later on, you must tell me what you think it all means for the project. But right now, you must come with me to the holoscreen. I received an urgent message from Santani a few minutes ago. Your father wants us to contact him immediately. Wanda's smile faded. She had been alarmed at the recent reports of fighting on Santani. As Imperial budget cutbacks went into effect, Imperial hyperships were few, and the distant world felt isolated from the rest of the Empire. Pockets of rebellion had erupted throughout the planet. Grandfather, I hope everything's all right. Wanda's voice revealed her fear. Don't worry, dear. After all, they must be safe if Rach was able to send a message. In Seldon's office, he and Wanda stood before the holoscreen and waited a few seconds for the intergalactic connection to be established. Slowly the screen seemed to stretch back into the wall, as if it were the entrance to a tunnel, and out of the tunnel, dimly at first, came the familiar figure of a stocky, powerfully built man. As the connection sharpened, Seldon and Wanda were able to make out Rach's bushy, doll-like mustache, and the figure in the hologram sprang to life. Dad! Wanda, listen, I don't have much time. Rach flinched, as if startled by a loud noise. Things have gotten pretty bad here. The government has fallen, and a provisional party has taken over. I just put Manella and Bellis on a hypership to Nacreon. I told them to get in touch with you from there. The name of the ship is the Arcadia 7. I know what you're thinking, Dad and Wanda. Of course I would have gone with them, if I could have, but there wasn't enough room. You should have seen what I had to go through just to get them onto the ship. Rach, Harry broke in, how bad is it? Dad, are you in danger? Asked Wanda. I couldn't quite make out what you said, the hologram replied. There's a bit of fighting going on, so I'm going to sign off now. Remember, find out what happened to the Arcadia 7 going to Anacreon. I'll be back in touch as soon as I'm able. Remember, The transmission broke off and the hologram faded. Grandpa, said Wanda, what do you think he was going to say? I have no idea, dear. But there is one thing I know, and that is that your father can take care of himself. Come, let's get back to that equation, and in a few hours we'll check on the Arcadia 7. Commander, have you no idea what happened to the ship? Hari Seldon was again engaged in intergalactic conversation, but this time it was with an Imperial Navy commander stationed at Anacreon. I'm telling you, Professor, that we have no record of that hypership requesting permission to enter the Anacreonic atmosphere. It's likely that the Arcadia 7 changed destinations. Vorig, perhaps, or Sarep. Have you tried either of those two worlds, Professor? No, said Seldon wearily, but I see no reason if the ship was bound for Anacreon that it would not go to Anacreon. Of course, the commander ventured, the Arcadia 7 might not have made it. There's a lot of fighting going on. Those rebels don't care who they blow up, They just train their lasers and pretend it's the Emperor Aegis they're blasting. I tell you, it's a whole different game here on the fringe, Professor. My daughter-in-law and granddaughter are on that ship, Commander. Oh, I'm sorry, Professor. I'll be in touch with you as soon as I hear anything. Dispiritedly, Harry closed the visiscreen contact. How tired I am, he thought. Seldon became aware of a soft buzzing sound. It was the door signal. Yes? Wanda entered the office. Grandpa, I'm scared. Why, dear? He didn't want to tell her yet what he had learned, or hadn't learned from the commander on Anacreon. Usually, although they're so far away, I feel Dad and Mom and Bellis. Feel them in here, she pointed to her head, and in here, she placed her hand over her heart. But now, today, I don't feel them. It feels less, as if they're fading, like one of the dome bulbs. And I want to stop it. I want to pull them back. But I can't. Wanda, I really think this is merely a product of your concern for your family in light of the rebellion. Your dad will call any day to say all is well. Your mom and Bellis will land on Anacreon at any moment and enjoy a little vacation. We are the ones to be pitied. We're stuck here up to our ears in work. So, sweetheart, go to bed and think only good thoughts. All right, Grandpa. Wanda did not sound entirely convinced. But tomorrow, if we haven't heard by tomorrow, we'll have to... Wanda, what can we do? Except wait. Wanda turned and left, the weight of her worries showing in the slope of her shoulders. Seldon knew what he had to do. He placed an emergency transmission to Emperor Aegis the 14th. What a surprise! My friend Harry! Aegis's visage beamed at Seldon through the holoscreen. I am glad to hear from you, although you usually request a more formal personal audience. Why the urgency? Sire, began Seldon, my son, Rach, and his wife and daughter live on Santani. Ah, Santani, the Emperor's smile faded. A bunch of misguided wretches, if ever— Sire, please, broke in Seldon, surprising both the Emperor and himself with this flagrant breach of Imperial protocol. My son was able to get Manella and Bellis onto a hypership, the Arcadia 7, bound for Anacreon. He, however, had to remain. That was 3 days ago. The ship has not landed at Anacreon, and my son seems to have disappeared. My calls to Santani have gone unanswered, and now the communication beams are broken. Please, sire, can you help me? Harry, as you know, officially all ties between Santani and Trantor have been severed. I cannot make direct contact with any of my operatives on that world. But I can share with you any reports I receive from there. I am expecting another dispatch within the hour. If you like, I'll recontact you when it arrives. Thank you, sire. I thank you most humbly. And Hari Seldon dipped his head as the Emperor's image faded from the holoscreen. 60 minutes later, the holoscreen buzzed softly, and Harry pressed a contact in response. Aegis appeared. Harry, began the Emperor. My son. Yes. Rach was killed earlier today in a bombardment of Santani University. Seldon looked up out of tear-filled eyes. And Manella and little Bellis, what of them? Have you found the Arcadia 7? That search has proved fruitless, Harry. It may have been hijacked by rebels, or it may have made an emergency detour. At this point, we just don't know. Seldon nodded mutely, as if it were all too much to bear. Thank you, Aegis. Although you have brought me tragic news, at least you have brought it. Not knowing was worse. You are a true friend. And so, my friend, I'll leave you to yourself now, and your son, and your memories. The Emperor's image faded from the screen as Hari Seldon folded his arms in front of him on his desk and put his head down and wept. Wanda Seldon adjusted the waistband of her unisuit, pulling it a little tighter around her middle. Taking up the hand hoe, she attacked some weeds in her small flower garden outside the psychohistory building at Streeling. Generally, Wanda spent the bulk of her time in her office, working with her prime radiant. But when thoughts of her beloved father, mother, and baby sister became too much to bear, Wanda found herself out here, scratching at the terraformed ground, as if coaxing a few plants to life might somehow, in some tiny measure, ameliorate her pain. A profound change had come over Hari and Wanda Seldon. Hari now spent most of his days sitting in an armchair in the Streeling solarium, staring out at the university grounds, warmed by the bright bulbs overhead. Project members told Wanda that his bodyguard, Stetton Palver, would badger Seldon into walks out under the dome, or try to engage him in a discussion of the future direction of the project. For her part, Wanda retreated deeper into her study of the prime radiant's fascinating equations. She could feel the future her grandfather had worked so hard to achieve finally taking shape, and he was right. The encyclopedists must be established on Terminus. They would be the foundation. And Section 33A2D17. In it Wanda could see what Seldon referred to as the second, or secret foundation. But how? Without Seldon's active interest, Wanda was at a loss as to how to proceed. And her sorrow over the destruction of her family cut so deep that, for now, she just didn't seem to have the strength to figure it out. The members of the project itself, those 50 or so hardy souls who remained, continued their work as well as possible. The majority were encyclopedists, researching for the source materials they would need to copy and catalog for their eventual move to Terminus, when and if they gained full access to the Galactic Library. At this point, they were working on faith alone. A light breeze blew a piece of her blonde hair across her eyes. She pushed it back absent-mindedly and continued her weeding. "Miss Seldon?" Wanda turned and looked up. A young man stood on the gravel path next to her. "Stetton Palver. You're my grandfather's bodyguard." "Yes, Miss Seldon." Palver's cheeks reddened slightly. "Miss Seldon, it is your grandfather I'd like to talk to you about. I'm very worried about him. We must do something." "Do what, Mr. Palver? I'm at a loss. Since my father died, and my mother and sister disappeared, it is all I can do to get him out of bed in the morning. You understand, don't you?" Wanda looked into Stetton's eyes and knew that he did. "Miss Seldon, I'm terribly sorry about your losses, but you and Professor Seldon are alive, and you must keep working at psychohistory. The professor seems to have given up. I was hoping that maybe we, could come up with something to give him hope again, a reason to go on." Mr. Palver, thought Wanda. Maybe Grandpa has it right. I wonder if there truly is any reason to go on. But she said, "I'm sorry, Mr. Palver. I can think of nothing." She gestured toward the ground with her hoe. "And now, as you see, I must get back to these pesky weeds." "I don't think your grandfather has got it right. I think there truly is a reason to go on. We just have to find it." The words struck her with full force. How had he known what she had been thinking? Unless... "You can handle minds, can't you?" Wanda held her breath, as if afraid to hear Palver's response. "Yes, I can. Half the time I'm not even consciously aware of it. I just know what people are thinking, or have thought." Sometimes, the young man continued, encouraged by the understanding he felt emanating from Wanda, "I get flashes of it coming from someone else. It's always in a crowd, though, and I can't locate whoever it is. But I know there are others like me, us, around." Wanda grabbed Palver's hand excitedly, her gardening tool tossed to the ground, forgotten. "Have you any idea what this might mean? For Grandpa? For psychohistory? One of us alone can only do so much, but both of us together." Wanda started walking into the psychohistory building, leaving Palver standing on the gravel path. Almost to the entrance, she stopped and turned. "Come, Mr. Palver, we must tell my grandfather," Wanda said without opening her mouth. "Yes, I suppose we should," answered Palver as he joined her. "Do you mean to say I have been searching Trontor-wide for someone with your powers, Wanda, and he's been here with us for the past few months? And we never knew it?" Hari Seldon was incredulous. He had been dozing in the solarium when Wanda and Palver shook him awake to give him their amazing news. "Yes, Grandpa, think about it. I've never had occasion to meet Stetton. Your time with him has primarily been away from the project, and I spend the majority of my time closeted in my office working with the Prime Radiant. When would we have met? In fact, the one time our paths did cross, the results were most significant." "When was that?" asked Seldon, searching his memory. "Your last hearing before Judge Lay. Stetton and I pieced it together. We were both pushing Rael Nivas to come clean. I doubt that either one of us would have been able to push him alone. But together—" She stole a shy glance at Palver, who was standing off to the side. "Our power is awesome." "Don't you see, Professor?" Palver spoke up. "Wanda and I are that breakthrough you're looking for. We can help you convince the worlds of the validity of psychohistory. We can help find others like us. We can help put psychohistory back on track." Hari Seldon gazed up at the two young people standing in front of him. Perhaps all was not lost after all. He had not thought he would survive this latest tragedy, the death of his son and the disappearance of his son's wife and child. But now he could see that Rach lived on in Wanda. And in Wanda and Stetton, he now knew, lived the future of the Foundation. "Yes, yes," Seldon nodded forcefully. "Come, you two. Help me up. I must get back to my office to plan our next step." "Professor Seldon, come in," said Chief Librarian Trima Acarnio in an icy tone of voice. Hari Seldon, accompanied by Wanda and Palver, entered the Chief Librarian's imposing office. "Thank you, Chief Librarian." Seldon settled into a chair and faced Acarnio across the vast desk. "May I introduce my granddaughter, Wanda, and my friend Stetton Palver. Wanda is a most valuable member of the Psychohistory Project, and Stetton is turning into a first-rate general psychohistorian, when he's not performing his duties as my bodyguard, that is." Seldon chuckled amiably. "Yes, well, that's all well and good, Professor." Acarnio was baffled by Seldon's good humor. He had expected the professor to come in groveling, begging for another chance at special library privileges. "But I don't understand what it is you wanted to see me about. I assume you realize that our position is firm. We cannot allow a library association with someone so extremely unpopular with the general population. We are, after all, a public library, and we must keep the public's sentiments in mind." Acarnio settled back. Perhaps now the groveling would begin. "I realize that I have not been able to sway you. However, I thought that if you heard from a couple of the project's younger members, the psychohistorians of tomorrow, as it were, that perhaps you'd get a better feel about what a vital role the project, and the encyclopedia in particular, will play in our future. Please, hear Wanda and Stetton out." Acarnio cast a cold eye toward the two young people flanking Seldon. "Very well, then. 5 minutes and no more." "Chief Librarian," began Wanda, "as my grandfather has undoubtedly explained to you, psychohistory is a most valuable tool to be used for the preservation of our culture." "Yes, preservation," she repeated upon seeing Acarnio's eyes widen at the word. "Undue emphasis has been placed on the destruction of our empire. By doing so, the true purpose of psychohistory has been overlooked. Preservation of our empire is what the Encyclopedia Galactica is all about, and that is why we need your help, and the help of your great library." Acarnio could not resist smiling. The young lady had an undeniable charm. She was so earnest, so well-spoken. What she was saying was starting to make sense. Maybe Wanda Seldon was right. Maybe he had been looking at this problem from the wrong angle. If it were actually a matter of preservation— "Chief Librarian," began Stetton Palver, "this great library has stood for millennia. Does it not make sense to prepare a tribute to this great repository? The Encyclopedia Galactica will be just that, a giant summary of all the knowledge contained within these very walls. Think of it! All of a sudden it seemed so very clear to Acarnio. How could he have let the board convince him to rescind Seldon's privileges? He glanced again at the three in front of him. The board would be hard-pressed to find anything to complain about with the project members if the young people now in his office were a representative sample of the kinds of persons involved with Seldon. Acarnio rose and walked across his office, his brow furrowed. "We have, perhaps, been too quick to judge, Professor Seldon. Now that your project, this Encyclopedia Galactica, has been presented to me in such a light," he gave a brief nod to Wanda and Palver, "I realize how important it would be to allow you to continue your work here, and of course to grant access to a number of your colleagues." Seldon smiled gratefully and squeezed Wanda's hand. "Amazing," said Seldon when the three were safely ensconced in their ground car. "If you could have seen him at our last meeting, and today, after just a few minutes with you two—" "It wasn't too hard, Grandpa," Wanda said as she pressed a contact, moving the ground car out into traffic. She sat back as the autopropel took over. Wanda had punched their destination coordinates into the control panel. "He is a man with a strong sense of self-importance. All we had to do was play up the positive aspects of the encyclopedia, and his ego took over from there." "He was a goner the minute Wanda and I walked in," Palver said from the back. "With both of us pushing him, it was a piece of cake." Palver reached forward and squeezed Wanda's shoulder affectionately. She smiled, reached up, and patted his hand. The ground car eventually came to a halt outside the psychohistory building at Streeling. Seldon turned to face Wanda. "Wanda, you know what you and Stetton were able to accomplish with Acarnio. I'm sure you both can push some credits out of a few financial benefactors as well. There's another reason I think it's important for the two of you to get out around together. We must find other mentalics. The two of you alone are strong enough to push a single person. A large group of you, all pushing together, will have the power to move an empire." It was mid-afternoon, and the Trontorian sun glinted on the metal skin covering the great planet. Hari Seldon stood at the edge of the Streeling University observation deck, attempting to shield his eyes from the harsh glare with his hand. It had been years since he'd been out from under the dome, save for his few visits to the palace, and somehow those didn't count. One was still very much enclosed on the imperial grounds. Seldon no longer traveled around only if accompanied. Palver now spent the majority of his time with Wanda, either working on the Prime Radiant, absorbed in mentalic research, or searching for others like them. But if he had wanted, Seldon could have found another young man, a university student or a project member, to act as his bodyguard. However, Seldon knew that a bodyguard was no longer necessary. Since the much-publicized hearing and the re-establishment of ties with the Galactic Library, the Commission for Public Safety had taken a keen interest in Seldon. Seldon knew he was being followed, and he was not sure whether the Commission thought him a prophet or a crackpot, but it meant that at all times Seldon was safe. A light breeze billowed the deep blue cloak Seldon had draped over his unisuit. He glanced down over the railing, taking in the seamless steel blanket below. Beneath that blanket, Seldon knew, rumbled the machinery of a vastly complicated world. Below the gleaming metal cover, the lives of 40 billion people were being conducted. It was an image he loved dearly, this panorama of human achievement. And it pierced his heart to know that in a few centuries all that now lay before him would be in ruins. But, as Seldon foresaw the ruined dome, he also knew that from the ground laid bare by the last battles of the Empire, living shoots would spring, and somehow Trantor would re-emerge as a vital member of the new empire. The plan saw to that. Seldon lowered himself onto one of the benches ringing the deck's perimeter, and thought wistfully of Wanda. He rarely saw his granddaughter at all any more, and invariably Stetton Palver was present when he did. In the 3 months since Wanda and Palver had met, they seemed to be inseparable. Wanda assured Seldon that the constant involvement was necessary for the project, but Seldon suspected it went deeper than mere devotion to one's job. He remembered the telltale signs from his early days with doors. It was there in the way the two young people looked at each other, with an intensity born not only of intellectual stimulation, but emotional motivation as well. Further, by their very natures, Wanda and Palver seemed to be more comfortable with each other than with other people. In fact, Seldon had discovered that when no one else was around, Wanda and Palver didn't even talk to each other. Their mentalic abilities were sufficiently advanced that they had no need of words to communicate. The other project members were not aware of Wanda and Palver's unique talents. Seldon had felt it best to keep the mentalics' work quiet, at least until their role in the plan was firmly defined. Seldon stood slowly, stiffly. He was due back at Streeling in an hour to meet Wanda and Palver. They had left word for him that they were bringing a great surprise, another piece for the puzzle, Seldon hoped. He looked out one last time over Trantor, and before turning to make his way back, smiled and softly said, "Foundation." Hari Seldon entered his office to find that Wanda and Palver were already there, seated at the conference table. As was usual with those two, the room was completely silent. But then Seldon stopped short, noticing that a new fellow was sitting with them. "Wanda, Palver." Seldon kissed the former on the cheek and slapped the latter on the shoulder. Seldon turned to the stranger, who had stood up. "Hello, I am Hari Seldon." "I am most honored to meet you, Professor. I am Boor Aluren." Aluren offered a hand to Seldon in the archaic and hence most formal mode of greeting. "Boor is a psychologist, Hari," said Palver, "and a great fan of your work." "Most important, grandfather," said Wanda. "Boor is one of us." "One of you?" Seldon looked searchingly from one to the other. "Do you mean—" Seldon's eyes sparkled. "Yes, grandfather. Yesterday, Stetton and I were walking through Erie sector, getting out and around, as you'd suggested, probing for others. All of a sudden, wham! There it was." "Amazing!" Seldon beamed at his granddaughter. "And it is Doctor, isn't it? Aluren. What do you make of all this?" "Well," began the psychologist thoughtfully, "I am pleased. I've always felt different somehow, and now I know why. And if I can be of any help to you, why—" The psychologist looked down at his feet, as if all of a sudden he realized he was being presumptuous. "What I mean is, Wanda and Stetton said I may be able to contribute in some way to your psychohistory project. Professor, nothing would please me more." "Yes. Yes, that's quite true, Dr. Aluren. In fact, I think you may make a great contribution to the project, if you'll join me. Of course, you'll have to give up whatever it is you do now, whether it is teaching or private practice. Can you manage that?" "Why, yes, Professor, of course." "So it's set, then," said Seldon. "You will join the psychohistory project. I promise you, Dr. Aluren, this is a decision you will not regret." "Wanda, Stetton," Seldon said later, after Boor Aluren had left, "this is a most welcome breakthrough. I think it may be time for me to tell you more about the idea Hugo Amaral had years ago, and about the plan I've devised as a result of that idea. I haven't been ready to elaborate upon it until now, because until this moment all the pieces have not been in place. As you know, Hugo felt that we must establish two foundations, each as a fail-safe measure for the other. It was a brilliant idea, one which I wish Hugo could have lived long enough to see realized." Here Seldon paused, heaving a regretful sigh. "But I digress. 6 years ago, when I was certain that Wanda had mentalic or mind-touching abilities, it came to me that not only should there be 2 foundations, but they should be distinct in nature as well. One would be made up of physical scientists. The encyclopedists will be their pioneer group on Terminus. The second would be made up of true psychohistorians, mentalists. You. That is why I've been so eager for you to find others like you. Finally, though, is this. The second foundation must be secret. Its strength will lie in its seclusion, in its telepathic omnipresence and omnipotence. The second foundation must be the strong, silent bodyguard of the primary foundation. Wanda, you and Palver are the pioneers of the second foundation, the guardians of the Terminus foundation. But how, Grandfather, demanded Wanda. We are just 2, well, 3 if you count Bohr. To guard the entire foundation, we would need hundreds, thousands. Find however many it takes, granddaughter. You and Stettin must seclude yourselves in order to form the nucleus of the second foundation. From there you will cast your nets into the ocean of humanity. Grandfather, what are you saying? Wanda had left her seat and was kneeling next to Seldon's chair. Do you want me to leave? No, Wanda. Seldon's voice was choked with emotion. I don't want you to leave. But it is the only way. You and Stettin must isolate yourselves from the crude physicality of Trantor. As your mentalic abilities grow stronger, you will attract others to you. The silent and secret foundation will grow. You see, don't you, the truth, the absolute necessity of what I'm saying, don't you? Yes, I do, Grandfather. More important, I feel the brilliance of it as well. Rest assured, we won't let you down. I know you won't, dear, said Seldon wearily. How could he do this? How could he send his darling granddaughter away? She was his last link to his happiest days, to Dors, Hugo, and Rach. She was the only other Seldon in the galaxy. I shall miss you terribly, Wanda. A tear worked its way down Seldon's finely creased cheek. But, Grandfather, Wanda stood with Palver, preparing to leave. Where shall we go? Where is the second foundation? Seldon looked up and said, The Prime Radiant has already told you, Wanda. Wanda looked at Seldon blankly, searching her memory. Seldon reached out and clutched at his granddaughter's hand. Touch my mind, Wanda. It is there. Wanda's eyes widened as she reached into Seldon's mind. I see, Wanda whispered to Seldon. Section 33A, 2D, 17. Stars End. Epilogue. I am Hari Seldon, former minister to Emperor Cleon I, Professor Emeritus of Psychohistory at Streeling University on Trantor, Director of the Psychohistory Research Project, Executive Editor of the Encyclopedia Galactica, Creator of the Foundation. It all sounds quite impressive, I know. I have done a great deal in my 81 years, and I am tired. Looking back over my life, I wonder if I should have, done certain things differently. Perhaps I neglected to make some small, incidental adjustments here or there that would have in no way compromised the future of humanity, but might have dramatically improved the life of an individual dear to me. Hugo, Rach. I can't help but wonder, was there something I could have done to save my beloved Dors? Last month, I finished recording the Crisis holograms. My assistant, Gail Dornick, has taken them to Terminus to oversee their installation in the Seldon Vault. He will make sure that the vault is sealed and the proper instructions are left for the eventual openings of the vault. during the crises. I will be dead by then, of course. What will they think, those future foundationers, when they see me, or more accurately, my hologram, during the first crisis, almost 50 years from now? Will they comment on how old I look, or how weak my voice is, or how small I seem bundled in this wheelchair? Will they understand, appreciate the message I've left for them? Ah, well, there's really no point in speculating. As the ancients would say, the die is cast. I heard from Gale yesterday. All is going well on Terminus. The project members are flourishing in exile. I shouldn't gloat, but I can't help but chuckle when I recall the self-satisfied look on the face of the chief commissioner, that pompous idiot Ling Chen, when he banished the project to Terminus 2 years ago. Although ultimately the exile was couched in terms of an imperial charter, the state-supported scientific institution, and part of the personal domain of His August Majesty, the Emperor. The chief commissioner wanted us off Trantor and out of his hair, but he still could not bear the thought of giving up complete control. It is a source of secret delight to know that it was Lass Zenau and I who chose Terminus as Foundation's home. My one regret where Ling Chen is concerned is that we were not able to save Aegis. That emperor was a good man and a noble leader. His mistake was to believe in his title, and the Commission of Public Safety would not tolerate the burgeoning imperial independence. I often wonder what they did to Aegis. Was he exiled to some remote outer world, or assassinated like Cleon? What will I do now? With Gale finally gone to join the Terminus group, I am utterly alone. I hear from Wanda occasionally. The work at Star's End continues on course. In the past decade she and Stetton have added dozens of mentalics to their number. They increasingly grow in power. It was the Star's End contingent, my secret foundation, who pushed Ling Chen into sending the encyclopedist to Terminus. I miss Wanda. It has been many years since I've seen her, sat with her, holding her hand. When Wanda left, even though I had asked her to go, I thought I would die of heartbreak. But for the Foundation to succeed, it was necessary for Wanda and Stetton to go to Star's End. Psychohistory decreed it, so perhaps it really wasn't my decision after all. I still come here every day, to my office in the Psychohistory building. The offices are silent now, and the hallways echo with the whir of my wheelchair motor. I suppose I should vacate the building, turn it back over to the university to allocate to another department. But somehow it's hard to let go of this place. There are so many memories. All I have now is this, my prime radiant. This is the means by which psychohistory can be computed. It's all here in this small black cube. As I sit here, this deceptively simple-looking tool in the palm of my hand, I wish I could show it to R. Daniel Olivar. I need only close a contact for the office lights to dim. As I settle back in my wheelchair, the prime radiant activates, its equations spreading all around me in three-dimensional splendor. To the untrained eye, this multicolored swirl would merely be a jumble of shapes and numbers. But for me and Hugo, Wanda, Gale, this is psychohistory come to life. What I see before me, around me, is the future of humanity. 30,000 years of potential chaos compressed into a single millennium. That patch, glowing more strongly day by day, is the Terminus equation, and there, skewed beyond repair, are the Trantor figures. But I can see, yes, softly beaming, a steady light of hope, Star's End. This was my life's work, my past, humanity's future. Foundation. So beautiful, so alive that nothing can. Doors. Hari Seldon, the final portion of his entry in the Encyclopedia Galactica. Found dead, slumped over his desk in his office at Streeling University in the year 12,069 of the Galactic Era, or the year 1 of the Foundation Era. Apparently, Seldon had been working up to his last moments on psychohistorical equations. His activated prime radiant was discovered clutched in his hand. According to Seldon's instructions, the instrument was shipped to his colleague, Gail Dornick, who had recently emigrated to Terminus. Seldon's body was jettisoned into space, also in accordance with instructions he'd left. The official memorial service on Trantor was simple, though well attended. It is worth noting that Seldon's old friend, former First Minister Ito de Merzel, attended the event. Attempts by the Commission of Public Safety to locate de Merzel in the days following the Seldon memorial proved to be unsuccessful. Wanda Seldon, Hari Seldon's granddaughter, did not attend the ceremony. It was rumored that she was grief-stricken and had refused all public appearances. To this day, her whereabouts from then on remain unknown. It has been said that Hari Seldon left this life as he lived it, for he died with the future he created unfolding all around him. This is David Dukes. We hope you've enjoyed this production of Forward the Foundation by Isaac Asimov. It was produced by David Rapkin, directed by Bob Walter, mixed directed by Lars Hoel, abridgment by Gail Greiner Stern. Production copyright 1993, Bantam Doubleday Dell Audio Publishing. All rights reserved. The book, Forward the Foundation, is available wherever Doubleday books are sold.